So the show we're opening today, it's you and me and everyone we know. Curated by Christian Viveros-Fauné. Christian, he's an art critic. He has been a gallerist. He's an academist. He's also a curator at large of the USF in Miami.
Tampa.
Sorry, in Tampa. In Tampa. And so for this show invited 6 artists and sorry, and I hope I'm saying well the names. So we have Manal Aldoyan, Manal Aldoyan. Hello, Manal. Monica Bengoa. Hi, Manal. Monica.
Hello.
We have Sebastian Bremer from New York. We have Anastasia Salmoyova, which I think she's has not yet arrived. Jorge Tacla. Hi, Jorge. Can you say hello so we can see you?
Jorge, you have to put on your microphone.
Unmute.
And video.
No, I can see him. He's Mary Moynihan today.
We have also with us Gianfranco Foschino. Hi, Gianfranco. I don't know. I haven't seen if he arrived yet.
Yeah, Gianfranco may have not joined us yet, but he will.
It's okay. It's okay. And I hope I'm not missing anyone. I think I said all of the artists that are participating to this show. With no more introduction from my side, I give you the word. Christian, can you tell us about this exhibition? And just before I give you the word, I want to say again, thank you for this beautiful exhibition that we just opened at 15 minutes ago.
Well, thank you, and thank the gallery, and thank Jal, and thank Marc Litron. You guys have been wonderful to work with, and I think we put together an amazing exhibition. Obviously, thank the artists. First of all, I first just sort of want to run through. I mean, I'm going to talk for about 5 to 10 minutes, and I want to run through some ground rules because then I want to incorporate the artists. So I want to make this discussion as interactive as possible, especially for those of you who are joining us from your kitchens, your living rooms, your bedrooms, from Spain, Brooklyn, London, other places, obviously. So like I said, first I'm going to say a few words, and then really I'm going to ask the artist to tell us a story because I think stories these days are very important, and I think I want to hear, and I want you to hear the stories of how some of these artworks were made, and from the artists themselves. Have them also tell you what they meant to them then and what they might mean to them now. I think that's an interesting setup, as it were. And we might get some interesting responses, or I know we'll get some interesting responses from the artists. And then after we get through with that sort of those episodes of storytelling, as it were, I want to sort of turn the floor over to, well, you guys who are here with us, the viewers who are now somehow or other also public, and have you guys send us questions or comments and anything interesting that you might have to say for us. This is clearly an experiment for everyone. It's no more so it is as much for Sabrina and Jal and everyone at the gallery and the artist as it is for me. This is a first attempt for me personally to try and approximate the object and space experience, which is something I know how to deal with well, or at least have some significant practice at, in this other modality, right? That we're all sort of trying to make less virtual, and more actual. And I think succeeding, frankly, because this is kind of all we've got. Um, uh, I want to talk about how the show came about a little, because I think that's a interesting place to start. So, quite simply, it was Sabrina who, sort of in her infinite wisdom, reached out to a number of curators, myself among them, um, to propose ideas for virtual exhibitions, just as we were sort of reeling not only from the idea of having to protect ourselves from the current pandemic, but also from the idea of having to really shut ourselves off entirely from consuming and producing contemporary culture. Um, Certainly, I think the gallery and the artist and myself and some of the people who've joined us, as I see their names, are people who are used to living through culture. That is their filter. And suddenly we're in a situation where of force majeure, clearly, where we can't do that anymore. It's actually physically impossible. So this method of doing things is a way to try and sort of break through that quarantine, right? The quarantine is not just physical; it's also cultural. And human beings, frankly, we live through culture. Um, um, I haven't asked each and every one of the artists involved in this show or Sabrina, but I think they'd all concur with me in thinking that this modest effort, the modest effort involved in making this show, is sort of the very definition of contemporary culture, especially sort of contemporary culture made under duress. Um, the title of the show, which is You and Me and Everyone We Know, Art in the Age of Social Distancing, kind of came to me. I didn't quite realize where it came from originally. It's a crib, or frankly, a bit of plagiarism from a movie, an American movie, which I've never actually seen. But it was running around in my head, and I looked it up and I realized it was actually a film that somebody had made, which is a film that apparently is not bad. I'll have to watch it in the future. What I do know about it is that it was made in 2005, and it consists of several plots that revolve around the intertwined lives of a number of characters. I think it's sort of a lo-fi or independent version of Traffic, right? And many other movies that have been made in the same way. That is in its own way fitting, right? But once I noticed that this confluence of ideas sort of happened, I figured, well, we'll use this as an homage because it seems to be so perfect. We're all sort of intertwined as never before. We're also isolated as never before. And our state of limbo is caused by a plague that frankly really kind of resembles a bad movie. So why not sort of use the movie reference? Personally, like I said, this is really an experiment for me, right? In seeing to what degree a virtual exhibition can mimic, approximate, and maybe even surpass in certain kinds of respects. When we think about the genuine ability of digital technologies to help people communicate a common experience across miles and miles of space and transoceanic cable. The ability to approximate the live and in-person ideal of art objects or an event in a space, right? Be it the gallery, the museum, the artist studio, even the street art for that matter. As I said in a recent article I wrote for the Artlander, which is a magazine that's published or web published by a website called Artland. The virtual art experience may not be an ideal, but for right now and for the foreseeable future, at least in places like New York City, it's all we've got. Obviously, this is what we're doing now, and the actual show itself is an actual experience, which is no longer strictly virtual because it's not, and I repeat, it's not a simulation. We're actually talking to each other, right? We're actually looking at the artwork. Some of you are scrolling through and looking at the pieces, and if you aren't doing this now, you will be soon. thankfully with also with Marta's help. And it makes possible what is direct. This is direct and unmediated communication between us, artists, gallery, curator, and more importantly, with you guys who have joined us from wherever you've joined us from. The simple idea for me was really just to be able to invoke at this time sort of different voices, you, me, everybody we know, a sort of a pretext to put together the show. A show that, you know, strictly is really 100% virtual, but also deals with intimacy and isolation, our obligation to engage in social distancing, but also the absolute need to nurture personal and professional ties. I wrote in the curatorial text that putting together the show is really, really different from organizing a normal show. It requires faith, it requires generosity, it requires introspection, because it also requires that people pose and answer, at least partially, a really basic question. How do we invoke the possibilities of art and culture at large to trigger ideas, stories, conversations, emotions, feelings, and mental states in the middle of this global pandemic, and how those reflections themselves reflect on our external and internal realities? These and other reflections are made possible today in this meeting that we're all having thanks to the digital representations, and let's remember that they are digital representations of actual objects, of a group of really outstanding artworks made by a pretty eclectic group of international artists. They are, as Sabrina mentioned, Manal Aldoayan, who's originally from Saudi Arabia, who's joining us from London, and we'll hear from Manal, and she'll tell us what it's like to be in London right now. From Monica Bengoa, who is right now in Santiago, Chile. Sebastian Bremer, who is in Brooklyn. There he goes, waving his hand. Anastasia Samoloya, who may or may not be here. I hope she is. Who is in Miami, but is originally Russian. Fantastic photographer. And Jorge Tacla. No, sorry, did I run over Gianfranco Foschino? First, Gianfranco is in Laguna de Aculeo, which is sort of outside of Santiago. It's actually a bizarre landscape he'll tell us about. It's a riverbed a lake bed that completely dried out. And he's there now. And then Jorge Tacla, my buddy, who is Chilean, but he lives and works actually between New York and Santiago, but he is in New York presently. Some of these artists I've known and worked with for years. In fact, Monica and Gianfranco and Jorge currently have work up in Madrid at the premier Comunidad Madrid space, the Madrid city, a big Madrid city space, Alcalá 31, in a show that we actually opened to kick off ARCO, or the week of ARCO. I'm actually forgetting, the 24th of February. So we were all together not but 2 seconds ago, seemingly 2 seconds ago. And like I said, they all have work up there. That show is actually up until November for those of you who are in Madrid, if the thing actually opens to allow for physical visits. We'll see. And then Sebastian, I know from decades back, chiefly from my previous life as a dealer in New York City. Anastasia, I know from a brilliant show and talk that she did with my colleague Sarah Howard at the University of South Florida Contemporary Art Museum, where I also work. And Manal and I have only met. In fact, we've only sort of like seen each other's images this morning. And again, this is where the virtual and actual begin to sort of migrate together. And mind you, I don't want to get too William Gibson sort of Blade Runner about this, but when I saw Manal's 2007 stage photograph, that work, I Am a Doctor, up on Sabrina's website, I knew that she sort of really had to participate in the show, and that we'd have to eventually meet, if not quite in person, then at least through this medium, right? I want to talk for a minute about the artworks and their new context, because I think it's important to sort of discuss what was then and what is now, right? Each of the artists Each of these creators propose a single work for the show. Their possible meanings are altered, or, in art parlance and curatorial parlance, re-signified by the current crisis. Most of these artworks were made before March 22nd, the date the World Health Organization officially declared the coronavirus a planetary pandemic. One, Sebastian Bremer's work, was made entirely during the quarantine period, and I'm very sort of excited to have him tell you what that meant. Through their various media, which include painting, drawing, photography, textile, and video, each of these brilliant artists exhibits a conviction as urgent as it is millennial. It's been around forever. Art's not just thinking, right? It's giving shape to thought. I want to add one more observation to these comments in the manner of an appendix. And then I think this will be an interesting subject to discuss, particularly with the audience. For the first time since the intervention of the internet, we can say that you and me and everyone we know share the same reality under the cordon sanitaire laid down by the effects of COVID-19. Ironically, we can now use the same virtual medium to explore and communicate how this new reality unites rather than separates us, at least the vast majority of us. Though waking up this morning to news of anti-science Trump fans basically rioting in the streets of some of our state capitals is, well, disturbing to say the least. But let me just say as a setup to get to the artists' contributions and to get them to talk to you about their individual works. A word about storytelling. Joan Didion has a line about storytelling, which I'd like to repeat to you. She wrote, "We tell ourselves stories in order to live." And I think most of us know that to be true, right? We hear them from our grandparents, we hear them from our parents. We deliver them unto our children, nieces, nephews, what have you, and we tell them to each other, and we tell them to ourselves, more importantly, right? They are guideposts for living, frankly. And since I really want you to hear about the artists and how they made their work, what it meant to them at the time they made their work and what it might mean to them now, I'd like to ask them to relay to us their thoughts about their individual contributions, their practice, and not least of all, how the current state of quarantine in their respective cities and countries is affecting them. Maybe we can start with Manal. Manal, you made the work in this exhibition in 2007. Maybe you can start out by telling us what it meant to you then. How did you come about actually to make the work, and how is it resonating for you now?
I was quite surprised that you chose an artwork that's about 15 years old for this exhibition, which I really, at one point, when we first started this quarantine, I was going through a moment of wondering about the relevance of anything before this quarantine. Does anything mean now? Can you even transfer whatever you were talking about before being quarantined, the same ideas? Can you transfer them post-quarantine? And I'm having a very sort of, I'm on shaky ground on these ideas. The I Am a Doctor was sort of a picture that belongs to a series. I do a lot of work in participatory art, so I invite many people, many women mostly, to come and build artworks with me, usually. This was one of my earliest works, and I had invited the closest women in my circle to come and pose for me as their professions. And so this lady here came in, and she came straight from work with her lab coat. So I was like, here, slap some things on and let's take a picture. Okay, go back to work. And it was a big statement back then. It was about women's employment, because in 2005 to 2007, women's employment levels in Saudi Arabia were down at 3% only. So 25 million population, only 3% of the working force were women. And there was a huge debate in society about what jobs women can take, and a lot of thought leaders would sort of lead you into saying women will eventually join the workforce, but in jobs that suit their nature as women. This is sort of a big thing that was happening back then. And we needed, me and my friends, we were all working already, and we were away from this philosophical, that can't she, we were already doing it. And so I needed to document that moment. And it was a transitional moment, because it turns out now women are one of the highest employed in Saudi Arabia. And the past 2 years, the kingdom has just completely transformed itself and its sort of attitude about work and spaces for women to be in. I think, so this is, and then this morning I was telling the lady that posed for this picture, I'm like, guess what? That picture that we took so many years ago has been resurrected, and now it has another life in the time of Corona. And it's amazing how some artworks become memory or an archive or a documentation of moment, and some just come back as something that is more alive than any other artwork I've ever made. So it is very interesting that you included this work within this collection. As for your final sort of question about quarantine in London and in Saudi Arabia is where my family is. It is very, I've been sort of thinking about this time of quarantine. So London right now is rainy, cloudy, depressing. It's not, there's no like strict lockdown down here. People do go out and go shopping, grocery shopping, all that stuff is quite normal, optional. The mask stuff that in America is becoming quite a big thing to wear a mask when you go out. Here it's optional, not everybody does it. And so there's this fear. Our prime minister had corona and was in ICU, and we had to just sit back and see what happens, who else catches it. And there is this feeling that something really terrible is coming. And it's very hard in this kind of circumstances to work creatively.
Are you making work? I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Are you making work?
No, I'm not. I have just this week started to do physical activity, like do a little bit of yoga. It was really difficult for me I'm a very social person. I'm very close to my family. I have a huge Arab family, like 100 members, and we're very, very, very close knit, and to be far from them is very difficult. I'm isolating here with my husband, which is a good thing. At least I have him. I don't know at the end of it what's going to happen, but for now, don't laugh too hard. But it is an interesting time. I think especially this pressure of to make or to be physical or to have a good attitude. Really, I think I'm enjoying wallowing in my confusion. And I think the timeline of our lives has been disrupted. And I think this is something unprecedented, even trying to compare it to, I've lived in Egypt during the Arab Spring for 3 months when they removed the president and there was nobody ruling the country, no army, no police. And I was able to survive, mentally. I've been through the Gulf War in 1991. We were, the threat of chemical war, but nothing compares. You cannot do, it's completely different because there's this incredible, very strange feeling that the whole world is going through. And there's a lot of fear for our elderly community and our parents and our aunts. And so, it's very difficult to deal with these issues and make art for me.
Yes, and one of the things I've encountered, because I'm putting together this show and then also putting together another show that we're planning with the Contemporary Art Museum in Tampa, are different artist reactions, and they vary. They vary as we would expect them to vary, right? Sebastian, I mean, and Manal, by the way, I love this idea of enjoying wallowing in your confusion, because I think everyone has a right to actually sort of not demand immediate answers of themselves or of the culture, you know, or we should be demanding them from our presidents, that's for sure. But I think, you know, we don't have the response, since we don't have those responsibilities. I think it's healthy actually to try and think through processes, creative and life projects, you know, thoroughly. Brammer, are you also enjoying wallowing in your confusion? I know you to wallow in a lot of confusion and then sort of come out on the other side, but
yeah,
you, and also tell us about the artwork.
yeah. Manal, it's hard to follow you. You spoke really well, and I like how you even remember the questions in sequence. So I'll try to do the same thing. To begin, the work that Christian chose is very much the same situation as yours. It's a sister to a work that I did at the very beginning of my current practice. So that's something I made in 1999, and since it's about storytelling, I actually wrote this down once for a book. So I'll just tell you briefly the story of the original work, and I'll read it like a story.
But also tell us first, actually, because I know your work in particular is tricky. It's tricky to figure out what it is, and I think it's fantastic that we have the video that Marta has just put up so that we can all see. But explain your process, because it's not photography. You got to tell people all the time it's not photography. It's not photography.
Yeah, even though for many, you know, it's often has color and it has a lot of detail and it seems to translate well to digital media. It actually lacks a lot, even though it's mostly flat work that I make, because it's really handmade. So I turned the idea of the photograph upside down. A normal photograph is a depiction of a reality somewhere else, seen through a lens, then printed on a surface. And very often I use photography to draw on, but by making the mark making on top of it, literally with paint and scratching into the surface of the photograph is the physicality of it is really important, and it's really a sculptural experience almost if you see them, because it's like Braille, or it's like, you can compare it to many different things, but the singularity of each work is really important. It's not a photograph that is reproduced many times. It's the opposite. So I kind of turned the medium of photography on its head. By drawing on top of it, you kind of see it through my mark making. You look through my eyes. That's kind of part of the idea. But specifically back to this one work, it's a story that I've told many times because it was the original aha moment in making my work. I like I described here, but now I'll do it from my head because obviously you prefer that. It's really brief. But I basically started making drawings on photographs as out of a frustration of my own practice. I was making paintings. I used photography as a source material. And at some point I realized that there were certain pictures that just didn't do any better than being a photograph. So I had this beautiful picture of my niece swimming underneath a pool in Curaçao, where she lived. And my mom took the picture with a disposable camera. I found a negative, I printed it, and then I sat. And then I didn't know what to do with it really until my wife called me from Brazil on the way to flying to New York. And she said, I'm going to crash. The plane is not going to make it. I'm going to die. This will be the last conversation we have. And I said, of course, no, you'll be completely fine and everything is going to be okay. And as she got on the plane and her trip started, and that's about 13 hours from where she was, my mind started racing. And in the middle of the night, I couldn't sleep. And I started thinking, oh my God, famous last words, right? So in order to keep myself occupied during that period, I started on this one particular photograph of my niece swimming in a pool. And as I was starting it, I just started with a little mark. And I kept on going and making these kind of lines. And it seemed at some point a good idea to continue. And then at some point my mind changed a bit. And I thought, you know what, I'm keeping her magically afloat. it's magical thinking almost. And by that mark making, in the end, the picture that I called was I held my breath for 13 hours afraid she wouldn't come home, which seemed to me like the perfect integration of all this magical thinking and the hope and the inspiration that you have as an artist. You make sense out of something. And my niece has nothing to do with my wife, and the water has nothing to do with the air, but by seeing it all together and the title on top of it, it conveys a certain kind of holding your breath. Now, it was one of the first pictures where I really felt like all these ideas in my work and the photography came together. And it now so happened that many years later, about a year and a half ago, that very same niece that was swimming in the pool, she's now in her mid-20s, had a horrible bike accident and was in coma for about 2-3 weeks. And I couldn't go there and I couldn't do anything about it. And the only thing that I remembered is that I had a lot of negatives still from that particular role, and I wanted to do something. So I started working on these pictures with her in mind. And but I didn't work on them, I just printed them. And then this whole COVID shit happened, and then I figured what else to do but, you know, just continue on something that I started a few weeks ago. And then when I spoke to Christian and I told him, he asked me, what are you doing currently? And I told him this story. And so these 3 instances, the one story in 1999, then the accident a year and a half ago, and now this moment, they all are kind of related, even though they have nothing to do with each other at all. But they all, this feeling of swimming underwater and kind of suspended in animation, and me just registering time very slowly, mark by mark, kind of sew things together. And it doesn't really make sense, but at the same time, it completely makes sense. It's like...
Well, there is, sorry to interrupt you, Sebastian, but indeed there is something very interesting in this technique and in your practice. And I don't know if you work with a rotring pen or something similar, but I don't know which tool you use to
yeah, it's a variety of things. The smallest mark I do with a tiny razor blade point, the medium things with a small pen, and the bigger things with a wooden cocktail pricker dipped in paint.
So what's interesting for me is that the connection for me between these different works that you have done in different moments, they all came out or came up in a moment of anxiety, in fact. And there is a certain contradiction with this technique that you use, where you have to be very focused and very how to say that it's so delicate that in a way when you say for me it's a way to measuring time or to keep track of the time. I just can imagine you, and when I saw the video of you doing the work, I can only imagine you being totally absorbed by this work and losing track of time.
It focuses you to a certain extent, but because it takes such a long time, a lot of things filter in, and that's ideas that go through your head to radio that you listen to music that you listen to, and that kind of cooks up a soup that in the end comes across in some way or the other in the mark making. And I've had this experience that is really nice, is that since it's very nonverbal and kind of sideways and a little bit poetic, that you think sometimes that you're full of shit because you're just you're conjuring all these elements together. But I've had often that people, upon seeing a picture, tell me a story that is very parallel to the original idea that I set out, even though there has been no explanation of the thing, which is a nice happenstance. It feels good. But as far as the moment right now, I continue with certain things that I was making. And my studio is an amazing reprieve. It's exactly the same space, and I'm sitting in the little office on top of an old factory, and the only thing that's changed is the landscape outside of the window. And and thank God I have somewhere to go to because it's really good for the family and my marriage, Manal, to take a break once in a while. So.
I want to hear from Monica now. Monica, are you able to work in your studio, or is your studio and your home connected? And then tell us about your work, about the work that you contributed to the show.
Yes. Well, actually, I brought my studio just a few months ago to my house. You know? I used to have it for the past 10 years. It was somewhere else. So I'm really lucky that it's here, even though I'm still like cleaning and organizing everything. And I have been working, and actually the work that I have been working on has a lot to do with the piece that you chose for this show. Maybe have to go a little bit back. I guess when, like 5 years ago, when I turned 45, I realized that probably I was going to be able to do like 15 or 20 pieces before I'm really too old to work, because they take really too much time. Everything is handmade. And even though I have been working in several projects with assistants, I really enjoy it a lot to do it myself, especially everything related with textile art. And so I realized that I really have to choose very good the pieces that I'm going to be able to finish before I'm or too old, or just my body doesn't work anymore. So what started out as an exercise to check if it was possible to do a piece, like I'm going to say it, I'm knitting a complete book. And so I thought I'm going to make this small exercise and to see if it works, to knit like a small, in this case, a poem, and see if how long it takes, and how many lines, how many letters can fix in this page, because it's one it's jacquard, so I'm not embroidering the letters on top of the knitting. I'm doing changing the colors in between the knitting. So I chose this poem because it was like going back to an old friend. When I was at university many years ago now, Zurita was one of those writers.
Raúl Zurita, who's a very important poet, a very important Latin American poet. I mean, for us, he is the Pablo Neruda of our lifetime, as it were, right?
Yes, and he was always a big inspiration. And even though at that time I didn't allow myself to work with actual text, this happened like many years later. I chose this poem because it was like I said, like the ones you have been carrying with you like the whole life. So it was a good way to start working in this way of choosing only like your best friends to be with. And now I'm working in a piece. Maybe I can show you a little bit. I have it here with me. Since you asked what we are doing and if we are able to do something. And so I'm knitting, because this is one of my favorite hobbies and my work now. So I'm knitting the book L'Analphabet of Agatha Christophe. And so I believe I will be working like for 5 years or more, and because I'm trying to do the whole piece. I'm like, I used to run like long distance when I was younger. So I believe I'm like that. So I'm a long distance runner. And so it's a very, very long-term project that I'm working on. But of course, in parallel, I have to be like visiting other projects at the same time. So always working in 3 or 4 projects at the same time.
Thank you. That's brilliant. Maybe we'll loop. Is Anastasia with us? Yes, no, hello, there you are.
Yes, she is.
Anastasia, how are you?
Hi.
Good. Listen, so tell us about the picture that is in our show, when it was taken, and you can sort of go into how that picture is part of a larger series of works that were just published by, you just published a book, or rather Steidl just published your book. And tell us what you were, tell us about that picture, tell us about that picture. Then when you took it, tell us about the picture as it sort of stands in the book, which is gorgeous and is actually sitting on my desk. Maybe my wife can hand it to me and I can show you, I can show everybody in a second. But also tell us about what it might signify now. I mean, I have my own ideas, which is why I included it, but here's the book. It's called Flood Zone, and Steidl just published it, I believe in 2019. Yeah, it was 2019. Anyway, Anastasia.
Hi, everyone. Oh, so nice. From very hot Miami. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, you can hear me. This is the book, and this is the photograph in there. So as Christian mentioned, the book is called Flood Zone. It's from my ongoing project. It's photographic work, which was really a new approach for me. I was always sort of lens-based, but never fully observational photographer. So the move to Miami propelled the start of this project. It really was very fluid at one point. I was walking around. I'm a Nordic person. I'm from Russia originally, and I lived in Chicago area for quite a while. And then moving to subtropical climate just changed everything for me. Where I live in Miami Beach, we are experiencing high tides that are now king tides about 4 times a year. Just the other week, while in COVID, I was sloshing around in water, and I took some photographs of, Miami Beach, certain streets just covered in salt water. So salt water seeps through drains, and then we get flooded streets. The project is roughly about climate change and rising sea levels. It's over 80 photographs in this book, but none of them are sort of direct, like this is not an image of flooding, this is just how land gets developed. So the project, and that photograph in particular, is sort of about climate gentrification. There are certain areas that are now a lot more lucrative for developers. So they're getting new constructions, new buildings, even though they're in the same sort of flood zone. And then the original population of those areas that were not waterfront before, but now are, more desired because of the higher ground, the original population is being pushed away. And all of this I really learned by doing and walk around with camera. And the project took about 3 years. It's ongoing and weekly work, which has been, of course, restricted now with home isolation. I'm currently in my studio. I have other projects going on, including still life and sort of painting and collage. It's all limited hours. What's not pictured is my son, who's just next door. So he's playing Minecraft and building his own worlds, but that limits my time. So I'm just gonna try. I'm organizing the studio. I'm setting it up for more painting work. So we'll see what develops.
You want to tell us a little bit, because I know from your Instagram account that you're actually out in the world taking a picture every now and again, but you're also doing these breakfasts with ... company, with photographers, basically historical photographers. Tell us a little bit about that, so that we know what you're doing now.
Yeah, actually, studio was full of discoveries because there's some boxes that I never unpacked when I moved here. Now that you ask, I see, I actually made a prototype for a book of those breakfasts. So, and I realized that I started breakfasts when I was in isolation during one of our hurricanes. We get one a year now. And so what this is it's very pictures generation project. It's sort of appropriation, but it's more of an homage. And this is where I left my teaching position a few years ago, and this was the first time I could actually have a breakfast in the morning because I was not teaching a morning class in photography. So these are my breakfasts laid out on top of photo books. Every morning I would try to get some inspiration before I set out to photograph. It's really playful, and it's sort of a twist on this like fetishism of food photography on Instagram. There are multiple layers, like always with my work. This is Cindy Sherman and the pool, and there's sort of like little shrines to these photographers that inspired me. And that's a prototype for a book. So I'm hoping that somebody will send me more books, and then I'll do like sort of illustrated anthology of art books. So it's like a nourishment for your body and for your soul.
And again, you're having breakfast with the history of photography, basically.
Yeah.
So there is, Christian, can I, sorry, because I pop up time to time. There is something that really interested me, but at first it took me time to figure out when you proposed the work, this specific work by Anastasia. Because it was a few weeks ago, and I didn't know Anastasia's work, and what I checked and what I could saw online was very different. So I was very surprised by this specific image, and then it was very strange because suddenly in my timeline on Instagram and Facebook, whatever, I started to receive videos from friends in Paris. I'm from Paris, with deers starting to enter the city. I saw the same image in another place, I don't remember in which country, whatever, but not in Spain, and the same, like animals entering the city. And suddenly, something that was not my concern, I'm sorry to say that, but it's true, I'm not especially an ecologist. And Miami is so far away from me, so it's true that we are all connected, but I am in Madrid. We are very high above the level of the sea, so it's not something that I feel an emergency for me. So I was very interested, and it made me think about, in the end, how this crisis, and this is my question, how this crisis or this global situation will it change your career as an artist that deal with climate change theme or topics, and how do you think, in your experience, and it's also for you, Christian, how do you feel that ecology was approached on the art scene, and I would say by the art market?
Ooh, that's a big question. I'll jump in for 2 seconds before handing it straight over to Anastasia. Yes, the chickens, for me, since I sort of proposed that image along with 2 others to Anastasia that we might include in the show, alluded to the, I don't know, fox sightings in London and the puma sighting in Santiago. For real, this actually happened, and the reclamation essentially of the of animal life, the flora and fauna of our cities, particularly of our urban centers, right? We're all locked in. They've got all the space in the world to, do whatever it is they do in New York, specifically to sing, if they're birds, to sing loudly. That and the sirens are really sort of the ambulance sirens that are the sounds of the city today, which is bizarre to sort of conceive of. Frankly, I think the bird song is even more bizarre than the ambulance sirens. But that was the reason that I was specifically sort of attracted to that image. Anastasia, if you want to talk to that maybe, and also to how you think how you think the read on your work and the read on your your project in general, your eco-photographic project in general might change?
Yeah, big question, and thank you for that. I've been thinking a lot, and if anything, you know, this is what's happening now. It's sort of a prequel. This is a little preview of what, you know, this next generation is certainly going to have to deal with collectively, with climate change. And, you know, it will manifest itself in various forms. Again, as you know, Russia was really not concerned with climate change for a long while, up until now. Permafrost started melting, you know, and we're seeing new microbes melting in Siberia, right? And then in Europe, you're going to see, and you're probably already experiencing now, hotter summers. We are entering here in the States, on the East Coast, hurricane season that's supposed to be more severe than ever. And this is already going to be the hottest summer on record. I started this project in 2016, which was the hottest summer on record then. You know, so all of this sort of, if anything, it's called for collective thinking and realizing that none of this is going to be addressed locally. It will affect everybody, and it's going to take world thinking, collective action, rather than, you know, individual efforts of different countries.
I think we have two more artists that I want to have speak to us. So bear with us for a little bit longer. Is Gianfranco Foschino with us? Gianfranco, are you here? No. All right, listen, I'll speak a minute about Gianfranco's work. Gianfranco, and maybe Marta, you can sort of load up the page, the platform, so that we're looking at the image. Is not, it looks like, well, obviously it's a picture. It looks like a photograph, but it isn't. In fact, it is a moving picture, as I like to describe it. It's actually a video that's presented almost as a framed photograph, the way a painting might be. And it evolves over time. It's called Departamentos. It's a piece from 2012. And basically it is a fixed view of an apartment complex. And if you click on the video on your screens, you will see this seemingly static image begin to move in tiny little details, right? You see people, you'll see the washing basically sway with the wind. You'll see someone go into the kitchen and turn on their lights. You'll see someone in the living room, they basically scratching their head, whatever. You know, there's a 9-minute duration on this thing. So you can take in sort of the teeming detail of it, right? And again, it was particularly attractive to me, not just in this exhibition, but also for the show that is up in Alcalá right now in Madrid, where this work is included, because it gives you a sense of both masses of people and obviously of compartmentalization. And again, for me, it's one of these works that meant something at one time, right? And means something slightly or maybe even radically different today. And maybe we can talk about that later. Now, unless Foschino's sort of like joined us, which I don't think he has, let's move on to Jorge. Jorge, what? Oh, Gianfranco, are you there? John? Hello? No, I don't think so.
No, he's not. No.
He's not. No, he's not there. Okay, Jorge.
Hello, Christian.
My friend, Jorge, you've made a career basically out of painting destruction, right? Damage, particularly sort of architectural damage, or the way destruction and disaster register on the built environment, right? And for me, including your work in this show was a total no-brainer, because I think because you've been working through these themes assiduously, you seem to be particularly prepared for an event of force majeure. But maybe you can tell us what this library that you've painted meant to you in terms of your practice, your process, and the way it might seem different to you today.
Well, the different there is in my work always there is a relationship between the victim and the aggressor, and the relationship between the two of them. Usually, the aggressor has multi-personality, and it can come very close to the victim, and in a very sweet way, because depending on which one of the personality comes at the moment. And right now, with this, the aggressor is invisible and is everywhere, and so the structures, the public structure that I usually work, which is in this case is a library, is abandoned, and it works in the line of my work, usually with these spaces kind of like collapsing, but it's more the identity of the psychological aspect of the aggressor that we have now, that it links to my work in a very sublime way. But not only in this kind of work. I think every time that something happened, that I'm involved in the world, a disaster happened, it forced me to change the way I work and forced me to change the material that I use. Right now, something got connected with the work that I was doing in the 80s. I spent 3 months in the desert of Chile in South America, doing a project for the Guggenheim. And I thought that I'm going to be working there, and I couldn't do anything. I sit on the space for 3 months, almost, in the middle of the desert. And then all the papers that I have, I couldn't do nothing. I just left them there. And the sun, it changed the color of the paper. And because I have to hold the paper with some stones, it left different marks. So right now, because I'm not going to my studio, I decide to work with Clorox on old sheets and cut the pieces of sheets and use the Clorox as part of what the necessity of the images now, of the relationship between what can we produce with what we have, and related with this idea of being clean now, of cleaning yourself all the time. But mostly, I think I'm doing a performance because I'm changing names every day. I'm working with the idea of I'm performing because I like to play the opposite way with the aggressor. I like to be the aggressor now, and the other person, the aggressor, the victim. So I'm performing daily into that.
I want to actually sort of emphasize the title of this particular work, which is the title of a long series that you've been making. This is Sign of Abandonment 39. The idea of signs of abandonment are all around. So again, I thought this was a particularly fitting work, and also the fact that it's a library, right? Is it a specific library, Jorge?
This one I combined two spaces. One is in what's the name of this city in United States? It's in a state. It's where they made the cars, and they have a really
Detroit.
And the public library there will have the most radical books. They didn't get fund enough to money enough to rebuild the library, and it got all the on the ground. And then where the left side of the painting is a place it's called St. Ain in Germany. It was a doctor which was doing a lot of it was a couple really bad things to people in the basement, and the house is abandoned, so they have a lot of information on books. So books, at the end, it was, the only reference to see what they were doing on this dramatic space that they built for do experimentation with people. So abandoned is because most of the spaces, they doesn't have the life of the human now. It's have only, it's just the spaces that remind of what it was in the history.
Right. I also sort of want to mention the fact that all of the works that we've looked at today require, giving shape. Again, as I was saying before, art isn't just thinking, it's giving shape to thought. And each of these artists, through their own materials, through their own media, have essentially done that in these pieces. In the case of Jorge, he's using oil and cold wax canvas, but the actual structure of the painting itself, which clearly you can't fully see because we're not in front of an object, is all about instability. It's all about the fragility that's sort of built into the image. It's the actual brush strokes are fragile. And so the structure, once it's finished, is inherently fragile, which I think, again, speaks to our moment, right? And it speaks to every moment, frankly, but maybe it speaks particularly loud to this moment because, frankly, this moment needs some speaking to. Anyway, listen, so that's it for me, and that's it for the artists, and I'd be curious to know if there's some questions out there that we can take on. All of us, Sabrina, the artist, myself. So if you've got anything to ask of us or any comments, we'd be very happy to take them on. And before I do that, I want to thank everybody so much for actually attending today, for coming to this opening, which is actually no longer an opening, it's an opening. Thank you.
Well, so please feel free to leave your question by the chat, and but I do have a question, but that will go maybe out a little from the exhibition specifically. For me, it's such a pleasure and a great opportunity in a way to have different artists from different points of the world, from different origins and with different practices. And my question is, how in around you or the city where you live in right now, how the artistic community is responding to the current situation? And it's a very broad question, and even for you, Christian, if you want to say something about it, it's something I'm very curious about.
Yeah, look, I'll kick it off. I mean, I think, it varies. I think people are obviously, in shock, and they're trying to figure out what to do and how to do it. There's a significant reinventing of everything from top to bottom, right? We're in a trade, we're in a practice that needs, almost sort of full reinvention. The idea that we can actually experience an art object and share it physically leads us to do what we're doing now. I mean, this is the perfect example of an absolute reinvention. Were digital showrooms around before? Yes, they have been, and there have been some people who've been sort of pioneers in putting together digital showrooms, but they've never acquired sort of the importance that they have today. Art fairs are doing them. They have no other option. Galleries are doing them. Institutions are doing them. Museums are doing them. At USF Cam, we will be doing one, like I said, very soon. We're doing it by necessity. I think it was David Zwirner. It's sort of near the end of the last Art Basel Hong Kong. I'm going to paraphrase, but essentially he said something like, the future's come much sooner than we thought, right? Here it is, right here. And you got to confront it and you got to deal with it. And these are one of the few sort of media that we have left. There have been a number of, what I've been surprised at is how it sort of equalized everybody, right? These kinds of crises benefit people with a lot of means, right? And people who are quick. And both of those things I think have sort of come to the fore. So there is, you know, behemoths like Google who can aggregate content, and behemoths like Gagosian and Hauser and Wirth and maybe even David Werner, and then independent curators who put together shows that, because they put them together particularly well, also share space now with the Sabrina and Amranis of the world.
But I'm not sure about, in fact, about this equality. I really feel that more than ever, I mean, it's been and it is a very huge work to set up this kind of initiatives. And I think we have the chance in-house to already, because of our program, we were already digital. And because we were in Madrid, and because we not necessarily used to work with Spanish artists, so we had to be digital. So we had the tools, but I'm not sure that, and I don't think that, at least in the art world, this is gonna equalize.
No, I don't mean to say it's gonna. I'm talking about the present moment.
Okay.
In the same way that the internet seemed to equalize things for a nanosecond, historically speaking, a nanosecond, and you got the Arab Spring, there is a nanosecond in which certain kinds of expressions, certain kinds of exhibitions can come up and compete at this moment in time.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm thinking specifically of and for those of you who care to look for it, there is a terrific show out there called "How Can We Think of Art at a Time Like This?" I think it's a terrible, terrible title, and even a terrible idea, because art is exactly what we should be thinking about. But the effort itself, which is put together by Barbara Pollack and Verhoeven, two independent curators, is out there, frankly, I think, competing for the eyeballs and the press attention and even the institutional attention, to the degree that there is that now, with the Hauser and Wirths and the Amranis and the Werners of the world. And I think they're doing a really good job. I imagine with a lot less resources than any of those other players that I mentioned. Maybe if there are other questions, or if one of the artists wanted to take this on.
Yeah, I just wanted to say about the moment and its specialty. I think it's super hard to see where everything is going to go to, but I just posted a little link to a talk that a woman who is already ready for this as well. Her name is Lee Edelcourt, and she's a futurist, and has been kind of trend predicting for a long time. And she's really thoughtful, despite her title. But it's she basically says two things that I find very easy to understand, and I kind of agree with. That this moment is just speeding up things that would have happened anyway.
Right.
And the other one that she says that I find really interesting is that it's a little bit the age of the amateur that is coming, or was already coming, but is coming faster, which kind of dovetails with the idea of being fast and quick. And the amateur idea comes a little bit from that the personally crafted, the individually made and expressed is going to be more attractive than the mass-produced, globally distributed kind of object, at least. Anyway, that's my five.
From your mouth to God's ears. I am no techno-optimist, believe me, but I do think there's a window. It's a short window, like we've seen that short window expressed in politics and in social commentary and in certain cultural expressions in the past.
Yeah, and another one more thing that she talks about a lot is the relative speed of time that we all know from being a child, how long a minute can take to how fast and far things go. This kind of weird relationship with time that we're all having right now, actually being in this global conversation right now at this very moment. I find those ideas really interesting. Anyway, I sent a link to the chat, so if you want, you can read it.
Cool. Let's entertain another question, if there is one.
So how do you think, so it's a question for everyone, sorry, because I have my list, but anyone can enter and make a different conversation. So, but thanks for share, okay. Sorry, I was checking if there was a question. So I have another question. How do you think the online experience of art is gonna shape the art world.
Any of you guys want to take that on? I've spoken too much.
I have no idea.
Yeah,
Well,
no,
that's an answer.
Manal?
That's an answer.
It is an answer. Manal?
Well, I'm just going to give you some of my observations, also leaning on the same question before this one, is what's happening now. And really, online presence is the primary focus for everybody today, especially in the art world, because it is about visual interaction. It is about gathering of people. But what I find has been removed, and this is just from me sitting on my sofa, clicking on a live feed on Instagram and seeing my favorite photographers having an interview with the editor of, Aperture Fund, or everybody now has time to talk, whereas it was very, very impossible before. And it was very complicated to see any of these amazing talks, because you would have to be invited as a VIP to an art fair, or to a function, or to a gallery opening to attend those talks. And I do think there is some sort of democratization of the situation, especially because of online presence. Today, I attended a talk by a very young artist, like she's in her early 20s, interviewing one of the biggest artists in the Arab region. She probably just sent him an email, and he was like, okay, fine, let's get on the line, and had an amazing 1 hour discussion. And these discussions that I attend have had 200 to 500 attendees. This is not a number you will ever find in any space, gallery, museum, no matter how important the artist is. The physicality of getting there, buying a ticket, and creating this experience of, I'm going to listen now to this one individual. I think there is a very huge shift. There is a re-examining of systems, current systems. This is something that we are all going to face. The systems of, me physically as an artist having to travel. The past 3 years, I traveled every 10 days. It was insane. And now, I wonder, why do I physically need to go somewhere to give a talk?
Yeah.
This is a beautiful platform. I can convey my ideas, save the environment from pollution, and actually keep my body rested and healthy. So I can make art and sit in my studio and think. So I think there is a shift. It was happening slowly, but like you said, Sebastian, it's just now we've been confronted with it, and we're just moving. It's just moving faster. That our sort of absorbing that, this is our new reality. Let's make the best of it. I don't, still till this moment, I have not stepped into one single online viewing room. I apologize, Sabrina, but I am having issues with online viewing rooms. I just, the experience of confronting an artwork, I can look at artworks on books, I can, talk to the artist like this, but confronting an artwork physically is the final luxury that, I don't think is attainable at this point. And the only way for us to, this is the big question mark. What happens to the physicality of our cultural sort of making experience? What happens to it?
In fact, it's interesting what you said, and there is a comment question by David, who says the online experience of art has been shaping it for a long time already. No, I mean, like affirming, asking. Well, it's a very broad comment, but a wide comment. But I agree with Manal in the fact that, and I share this philosophy that the online experience the online experiences we can have now, for me, they are not here to substitute the real life, but they can be a great complement, and they open new windows and new doors. And but I read this morning an article, but I don't remember from who, but whatever expert from New York, from the art field, saying that it would be critical right now, talking about the democratization of art, that it can totally fail if the online experiences are not well led, in a way. And in the sense that, and I don't have a clear thought about it, but it's true that I don't know how many emails you have received, how many invitations, how many Zooming you have been part of. So now it's, I think we need a little time to adjust. So I don't know if David, I'm taking well your comments, but if not, let us know. Let us know, and we will.
I have one thing for Manal, is that two things come to mind. Not too long ago, there was a talk by an environmentalist who said, "I'm so tired of having to fly every 5 minutes to go to another conversation about how we're polluting by flying all the time." So he said, from this moment on, I'm only going to do it via Zoom or give speeches that way. And I think the other part, I completely agree with the visual experience and the materiality being crucial, and I don't think anything can substitute. But what is interesting is, for an opening, usually it's just a lot of noise and clattering, and you have to kind of figure out who is who, and there is no conversation happening. At least the positive, I get to meet all the artists and hear what they have to say about their work, which in an informal way, which I like.
Someone apparently asked that I repeat the name of the online exhibition that I mentioned before, and it is "How Can We Think of Art at a Time Like This?"
Thank you. So there is also a question by Gabriela and Bruno, artist and a curator. What positive outcomes do you think can arise from this moment, Christian and the artists?
Well, yeah, look, moments like this are all about re-examination of first principles. Why do we make art? What does it mean? How do we actually get it out into the world? I mean, that's something we're dealing with right this minute. You know, what should its most urgent themes be? Those are the things that come to mind. You know, I think every age has its main themes and its confusions, and you know, ours have been particularly sort of, at least from my perspective, bountiful in the confusions, and maybe this is a moment in which we can get back to some serious thinking about, like I said, first principles. You know, the need to give shape to serious thought, as opposed to. I have nothing against entertainment, and I have nothing against eye candy. I'm in art. I'm totally for it, and I think we see some real examples of that in this show. But this is probably not a great moment for art's sake. You know, I think this is probably a good moment for artists, and I think folks will be looking to artists for meaning, for larger ideas that can help us adapt. Stories, like I said, you know, stories that will help us get through. Yeah, that's my answer, and I'd love to hear from the artists.
Can I hit two birds with one stone? Even the second question in the chat says, I would like to know if you're receiving any financial support, and in that case, whether it is private or public support. So one of the positive outcomes, especially in my region, the Arabian Gulf, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, who have now really invested a lot of money in creating museums, institutions, and you know, Dubai is much more ahead than Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia just started 2 years ago, really heavily investing in acquiring art, commissioning art. And now with this crisis, these are countries that have never had any structures to support artists through grants. It was very rare, and it was very rare that we were counted. So for example, I'll give you very simple examples. Like tax has just entered Saudi Arabia last year. Only 2019 they introduced VAT, and in the VAT structures they never included artistic practice or freelance creative work. And because of this crisis, where they are now thinking about sustaining economies in specific countries, governments have to think about it. They have to reassess what they feel about their cultural community. What do they think of their artists as contributors, true contributors and investors in the economy? So I find this a very positive, because I've already received sort of a survey from the Ministry of Culture in the UAE asking me, what would a loan look like for you? Like very, very specific questions, as if they're educating themselves about how do we make you sustainable as a community of creatives that do not belong to any entities. Saudi Arabia still continues to commission artworks and move along, but there hasn't been any words about grants. But what's happened is, as usual, in Saudi Arabia, the beginnings of the art world started as community-based. Artists got together, patrons got together and put together a show, put together grants for artists. So I think the most recent thing I heard was where there's a fundraising that's happening among the lead artists in Saudi Arabia to create a little fund for all the emerging or mid-career artists that are struggling at this point. Sometimes even at the peak of their career, artists can struggle in a moment like this. So there are little, silver linings to things. I think we can focus on in the way defining the importance of an artist and a cultural community within the larger country or world. I don't know. I hope.
I think it also, as you say, Manal, I think it does open up space for a lot of collaboration and for a lot of cooperation. And for art and projects made in the name of art and the name of culture to expand the remit to involve, say, help for other people, and for creative thinking in terms of capital campaigns that again help push culture out there and begin to fund it, since fundamentally not just the macroeconomy has sort of like melted down, but the microeconomy of the art world has also sort of melted down. So everyone needs help. So there are a number of initiatives in this country, in Saudi Arabia, as you mentioned, I think elsewhere, where people are pooling, they're coming up with ideas to pool together resources to make sure that culture stays alive and well.
Well, I have seen a very interesting initiative, and we have people from Hong Kong that are following us, that are with us in this conversation. And I think it's the word of course, they have more experience with the current situation, I mean, in terms of time, but the art community, they really, I think, pulled together a platform as a collectivity. And this is something I haven't seen in other places. And as a gallerist, I can say that it's a very competitive environment being a gallerist. And I'm sure artists, it's the same. You can have friends or whatever, but it's a very competitive market, and it has always been. But it's true that in some countries, I see that whether it's corporations coming together, like in Hong Kong, I'm reading a lot of news from USA, where it's a lot of patrons and individuals putting in place a system to support artists, collectives, etc. And in some other countries and some other region, I really don't know what will happen in Africa, and I haven't got the chance to hear about it. I haven't got a feeling there is a lot of things putting in place. But I was wondering about South America, because we have several artists from Chile, for example, in the show. South America, how things are being handled there, and what kind of support can you receive in Chile, for example? But Monica, what kind of initiatives?
Well, I know that culture has budget has been cut for a third right now, and actually I was thinking that it's very hard to think right now about culture when we know we all belong to an this is a luxury, you know, to work in culture is really something that we all love and enjoy, but it's very hard to think about it and to continue working when we in the beginning we thought, well, this is something that is striking everybody in the same way, but now we know it doesn't, and so I don't know. I feel very how can I say, in contradiction, you know?
In contradiction.
Obviously, in contradiction, because it's you have like many ideas that you would like to use in maybe a new pieces, and at the same time you know that it's very, very hard, and it's getting really harder, and we have to hope that it doesn't, but you know it is going to be much worse. So for many people, and in Chile it's pretty good, but if you think in the rest of Latin America, I believe it's going to, I don't know how people are going to be thinking about culture when you don't have nothing to eat, you know? When it comes to that point, it's like a luxury just be thinking about culture, you know?
Yeah,
So,
I'm not sure I agree with that. I mean, listen, people need stories, people need films, people need songs,
I know.
people need artworks as rallying points, and even as rallying cries, you know, to begin to think things anew. And that's, I think, something that culture, and particularly visual culture, can do particularly well. There are no guarantees, you know, but I think that is a significant possible mission for cultural expression today, on all sides of its production, dissemination, organization, you know, studio work, etc. You know, I don't think it's simply because I am a 24/7 consumer of culture. I think at this point, most people are 24/7 consumers of culture. And if something didn't tell us that, if we didn't know that before this crisis, we know it now because we're all hung up on Netflix, right? We're consuming it as quickly as it can come in. Netflix now, as of 2 days ago, is trading higher than ExxonMobil. It is a bigger corporation, financially speaking. That's nothing but culture. Culture is fundamental in this push to try and get over our situation, get over ourselves, get over our routines, get over our relationships with our significant others with whom we are living, and maybe not getting along, or maybe getting along differently. It's fundamental in our comprehension of the world. So I think we should try and be expansive in the sense, when we talk about culture, and we talk about visual culture, did not just be stuck in the rubric of what it can do in terms of the way we've been thinking about it previously, about what it does at an art fair. Not to trash art fairs. Art fairs are there for a reason, and they
in fact, Christian, I'm sorry to interrupt you, because there is one question that's perfectly linked with the first part of your sentence, and another one talking about art fairs, and so we can insert them. From Virginie from London. She's an art writer, in fact, and used to work for a very prominent gallery in fact in Asia. She says, I don't want to sound cynical, but don't you think this experience we are going through will, which never happened in human history, will be an incredible material for artists' creativity?
I don't find that cynical. I don't find that observation to be cynical at all. I find it to be particularly hopeful. look, somewhere around when Goya was working, we switched from basically being super vulnerable to lots of, we went from pre-modernity to modernity. And we sort of lost the ability, particularly through the visual arts, of documenting. I mean, let me not be too expansive here. He was particularly good at getting war down, at getting misery down, of getting confusion down. In a way, he probably anticipated even the idea of the Enlightenment being the idea of rational thought consuming itself. Did that a couple hundred years before Adorno and Horkheimer wrote the Dialectic of Enlightenment. Anyway, where I'm going with this is that in getting back to first principles, in getting back to, I don't know, suffering, right? Difficulty, plagues, pandemics, wars, and it being central to the discussion of the visual arts as opposed to ancillary, right? I think we're in a good place because those are central issues. They're far more central than, I don't know, observations about a balloon dog, right? Or even Warhol, to be perfectly frank with you. You know, I find those discussions to be far more urgent. I found them to be urgent before and certainly find them to be more urgent today. So there's a rejiggering of the focus.
So I move on to the next question, and the artist, you are very welcome to interrupt, to jump into the conversation whenever you feel the urge to answer.
Sorry, I also wanted to say, because I understand we have a number of people from Hong Kong who are joining us. I am spacing the name of the project, and maybe Sabrina, you can help me out, or one of the viewers. The project that you referenced, which is essentially a multi-institutional project that includes museums and galleries, and is a unitary platform that they've all basically put together to host not just images and videos, but you know, full-on shows, and that they've made entirely participative, is a great model, I think, for, you know, the rest of the world, certainly the rest of the art world, if we would just want to limit it to that. The only thing I've seen that is in any way similar to that here in New York, where the paradigm is slightly different, I mean, evidently, is the platform project that David Zwirner put together, where under his aegis, and in fact through his own sort of technology, he's created virtual spaces for a small number, but in any way, this is an important contribution, a small number of galleries in New York when he did Platform New York, and then he's done another one in London, and I think he's going to do, it's Art Power HK. Thank you, Lisa, my wonderful wife, who's helping me here. Just something, I mean, I should know this. I actually wrote about it for Artland, and it's an amazing project, and I really think it's a model for the way art communities should be engaging with each other and with their respective audiences. So anyway, I wanted to say that. Okay,
so how this pandemic situation would affect the art pieces on view in the next art fairs? Do you think art fair will kind of censor or avoid this topic in their program? It's a question from Marta. Marta.
Marta.
Not our Marta. Marta,
I find it interesting how topicality always enters a little bit in art fairs specifically, right? So when Trump got elected, you suddenly had that share of work. When Obama was finally elected the first time, you had that thing. And recently you've had a movement of much more appreciation for African-American artists in particular in the United States. And I've just been thinking, like, how is that last particular wave of interest going to go forward? And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of topical art about this, and I think it's very tricky because there's just a lot of stupid statements you can make immediately, and I think there's a lot of danger in over dramatizing your personal experience in the face of something so large. And again, that's why I like that woman Lee Edelkoort, the way that she talks about things, because she's just very thoughtful and brings a lot to it. I think it's very hard to jump to conclusions right in the middle as it's happening. And I think Goya's paintings of the French invasions and all the violence, number one, they happened in a little bit of a secluded period, I think, of his career. I think it was at the end of his career, but Christian and all the Spanish people know much more than I do about this. But it takes a while before things are gestated, I think.
Well, I mean, I think it varies in the artist. The disasters of war he made basically contemporaneous with the Peninsular War.
But were they distributed? That's my question. Were they in a studio, or was he distributing them already?
No, actually, he didn't get to distribute them, and this actually goes to your point. He actually didn't get to distribute. They were distributed posthumously.
Yeah, so
made in the moment, but clearly they were so radical that they'd been distributed for Francisco.
Yeah,
so that
is another good example. I was thinking.
No, but the different now is we don't have any physical destruction. Everything is, people are dying, but are dying far away from the city that we live every day. So usually in a war, there is a lot of memory of buildings, of it's right there. But right now, psychologically, we are spending time in our privacy, in our homes, and everybody's dying, but there is no reference of sound, only the ambulance, but buildings collapsing. So it's very strange, the invisibility of the situation that we're living. So when this is over at one point, the capacity of being over, it can last for a long time. But we're gonna go out, everything is the same. But we have, our conscious, our brain, and our humanity is dealing with thousands of dead. That how we're gonna, deal with this on the art world in the future, because most of the people, you might know 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 people who died, but from the thousands of people, how are we gonna keep the memory? Because I remember September 11th.
The individual reality of each little tragedy.
Yeah.
But it's indeed a collective mindfuck on dealing with this schism.
I agree, yeah.
Right? Of like the individual relative domestic bliss. I get to see my kids so much more because they're normally teenagers and they're gone. There's gems of beauty in there too.
Absolutely.
But like you're saying, this disaster that's happening literally a mile and a half from my house.
Yeah, where we're talking right now, right there outside my window, you know what I mean? There's a couple of hospitals around here, and it's the light there is completely different as the light that we're having, all of us at this moment. The staying home situation, the isolation of staying home, it's not a reality. It's the capacity that we have, it's a luxury at this point somehow. The other day I went to my studio because I have to get a couple of things. I'm walking distance, and they were only homeless in the street. That's all. But the condition they were the homeless right now is further, because they live out of the people walking on the street and give them something. They don't have a place where to buy food. They have, everything is closed. They, maybe a supermarket somewhere near them if they're lucky, but they're usually in the ground, on the floor. And they were like points, different corners, and full of homeless. The only people on Fifth Avenue, for example, which is full of stores, full of that. So visually, we are seeing something that we have not seen before.
Yeah, well, all we have to do is walk out. Well, I mean, we're not supposed to, at least in New York we can, to go buy some groceries and maybe do some exercise, but otherwise we're not supposed to go out. But yes, the privileged reality which we live, and it is our reality, let's not make a mistake there, it is definitively our reality, it is our enclosed reality, is vastly different from the reality of people who don't have the privileges that we do. And they are in fact, homeless. And the homeless population in this city, and I would imagine in every other city affected by this pandemic, has also gone through the roof for obvious reasons. Unemployment being the sort of most critical one. So yes, what's out there in the world beyond our immediate confines, our immediate personal quarantine, is terrible. It is a genuine sort of humanitarian disaster.
Yeah, I every week I do a little trip driving from the top of Manhattan all the way down, and Harlem is full. The subways are coming out of people with cloth masks because they have to go to work. Then you go Upper West Side, fucking desert. All the people who live there, they're in the Hamptons or upstate, I think, because you really see zero light in the windows. And then Soho, desert. But then you go Lower East Side, tiny little bit of life, but almost nothing. Yeah. But the Hasidic area, party time. Everybody was on the street. It was Passover, granted, but it was full with people on the street. No masks.
Yeah,
everybody hugging.
And that's the community between where you live and where I live in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
It's.
And the homeless. We have a homeless guy on the corner, and he's got a great amount of stuff. And I talk to him once in a while, but he's basically invisible. Without food, it looks like, and no one to panhandle to as well. No, it's.
I have something to add, Christian.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So I went through some rounds of emotions with all of this, and what it opened up for me is, of course, the time in solitude. And many artists, work in solitude. But here, there was also time not to just create in your usual sort of stream of thought and the flow, but to read, for instance, and looking back at history, like you've been mentioning, and realizing that there's always been a worse situation, and artists have never stopped working because of those. Well, in Russia, with all of our revolutions, Dada, this incredibly powerful movement, right, in arts occurred during some of the most tumultuous time. So if anything, to find sort of the ray of light with all this is that these strong emotions and such major shift in your everyday life inevitably will result, and it encompasses all those art fairs and the new themes being explored. Yes, this unity and community will be explored in arts. And the blessing of those earlier centuries and decades is maybe that artists were a lot less concerned with the art world. In a way, we've been maybe a bit ruined by that concept. Rodchenko was confined to his balcony. He was not thinking about the art world and how it will treat him. And as I was putting away, packing up the works for 4 solo exhibitions that I was supposed to have this spring, and sort of clearing up the studio and this empty space is in a way a sort of a blessing for all this deeper digging that occurs maybe in times like this.
Yeah, I'm not going to remember it properly, and I'm looking for it on my laptop right this minute. But Churchill, who was a quote machine, he gave good quote, had an observation about basically looking for opportunity in crisis, looking for opportunity in disaster. There are a lot of other quotes out there about this, but from different people. But the idea, and this was one of the quotes, and you can read this quote you can read many different ways, in a horrific way and in a very positive way, is that you should never let a good crisis go to waste.
Yeah.
And that, I think, speaks to all of us,
But that's a pressure
to politicians like Donald Trump, and then certain to us, right? Folks who are purveyors of culture.
There is some questions. I don't think we have time to answer all of them, but I'm going to choose one which I think is quite interesting, from Iñaki. For the artist and curator, did the virtual output of the exhibition, you and me and everyone we know, affect the works you decided to include in it? It's a very question for you, Christian.
I'm sorry, repeat it, because I was looking for this
Sorry.
quote.
Did the virtual output of the exhibition affect the works you decided to include in it?
That's an excellent question. Not negatively. I mean, I expected there to be the clear limitations that there are to experiencing something digitally on your screen, to you know, experiencing an object or an event in real time, right? It's an issue of adjusting expectations, and mine were already adjusted by the clear limitations that we all have, right? I was actually almost floored by the possibilities these works, you know, each of which I felt a personal connection to, had in this virtual / actual realm. Because I insist this is different from the way we were consuming virtual information previously. Partly because we're now discoursing, right, and talking to the artists, and we present these possibilities through this platform. Maybe this was always around, but we didn't feel the urgent need to use it in the way that we're doing now. And I think that engagement changes everything, right? I think it does, for me.
Right. So I think it's been 2 hours, and I think we can go on again for one more, but I think we have to.
I found the Churchill quote. Let me just read this, and then I'm going to shut up.
Like this.
What's that?
Like this.
Oh, like this, you think? Okay, good. Wait, a pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity. An optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. I like that. I think that's, you know, that's a good rule for going forward with the individual and collective missions that I think we have to get culture out there and to get positive culture out there. Anyway.
Yeah, and I have one more thing, the whole drama of that you cannot compare any kind of worldwide drama to the next. The 9/11 experience colored very much our beginnings of our relationship, Christian, because the first show with actually that work in it was right after 9/11, and there was really a division. A lot of people were saying, "Oh my God, this is the end of the world," and then there were other idiots, in this case like me, who were like, the sky has already fallen. What are we going to, you know?
What could be worse?
What could be worse? Exactly. Well.
There you go. Wait a minute.
There's COVID.
Exactly. All right, listen, I from my end, I want to thank everyone so much, everyone involved, particularly the gallery and the artists and everybody else who's tuned in. I see the director of my museum, who I haven't seen in a while. I just want to say hello, Margaret. Anyway, that's it for me. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much to everyone. Thank you for the artists to join and to accept Christian's invitation. Thank you, Christian, for taking the challenge of your first online curated show.
There will be more.
Now in your sorry. So thank you very much for that. And thank you to all of you that have been participating and joining us for the conversation. Please feel free to go through the exhibition quietly, and you can always connect on the social media with any of the artists, or even with me if you want to pursue the conversation. Thank you very much, and have a nice weekend.